pleasure to be here. And I would like to welcome you all to this talk on You Got a Toad. And this is not a talk about frogs. It's going to be, I'm just going to talk about a novel technique for dropping ransomware. So before we begin, a little bit about me. I work as a vice president at BNP Paribas, and my focus is threat intelligence, threat hunting, and intel-driven detection. I do a lot of research on the above-mentioned topics as well, which actually led me to a patent on threat attribution and numerous research papers that were published in many journals. So if you guys are interested, feel free to go to the two links that I've laid out here to know more about them. Just from a fun facts perspective, I like to play different sports. I'm into cricket, tennis, badminton, and many more. Allowed to play an instrument known as mandolin, and like watching movies. So with that, let's move on to the agenda. And I have laid this out into 4 different categories. And my hope is that by the end of the session, you all have a very good understanding on what is a toad and are able to answer the 4 questions that I have listed here. 1, what is a toad? 2, how it all began. And in this section, we are going to unpack the technique itself. And we are going to talk about a threat actor who pioneered this technique and how it has evolved over a short span of time. The next is who uses this technique. So in this section, we are going to talk about the 3 threat actors that are actually using this technique a lot to drop ransomware and also for extortion. And finally, the most important of them all, what can we do about it? What are the mitigations and controls that we can use to prevent and detect such attacks? So with that, let's move on to the different initial access techniques. As we know, there are many distribution methods for dropping ransomware, phishing. You have exploitation of public-facing infrastructure. You can achieve this through the supply chain and also stolen credentials by buying the credentials from initial access brokers. But today I'm just going to talk about a unique method, a unique form of phishing, which is toad. And let's understand what toad is all about in cyber terms. So toad stands for telephone-oriented attack delivery, and it's also known as callback phishing. What is unique about this method is that it requires extensive engagement and interaction between the threat actor and the victim. And of course, also relies on social engineering skills of the threat actor itself. You may have heard about phishing a lot, but this method is way different than phishing. In case of phishing, what you see is the attacker is calling the victim, but it's the other way around in a toad method. It is the victim that ends up calling the threat actor. So I wanted to cover the toad attack chain here, which I'm showing here through the lens of the cyber kill chain. It always starts with reconnaissance. Threat actors look for information about the target that could be useful in a phishing campaign, like any normal phishing campaign. Where it is different is delivery, though. What happens is the victim receives an email with different lures. Mostly what we have seen is lures related to subscription. And the body of the email does not have an URL, malicious URL. There's only one attachment that itself is benign. All the email tells the user is to call a number if the user wants to cancel the subscription. So notice here, there is no weaponization, there is no exploitation. And this is done actually to evade detection on the email security gateway itself. So what happens is, if the victim falls for this lure, victim will call the number that is provided in that email, and he's going to speak with a real person from a fraudulent call center that has been set up by the threat actor. And then the operator from that call center is going to use different social engineering techniques to lure the victim into installing the malware. Once that is done, the next stage is command and control is established. And finally, the action and objectives is really to deploy ransomware and also exfiltrate data for extortion. So I'm also added a sample phishing email here that is actually from a real campaign. And what you see here is the threat actor impersonating a brand. And the body of the email talks about a subscription to a service taking effect, and the trial subscription is getting over. And should the user not, if the user is not interested in subscribing to the premium subscription, he can call the number that is provided in the attachment. There is also a unique confirmation number in the attachment that is used by the operator during his social engineering maneuvers. Now, there are three things to note here. A, the email comes from usually free email services such as AOL, Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, you name it. And two, you will see that there is no sense of urgency in this email, or there is no sense of fear. It's a subtle message to the victim to call the call center if he or she doesn't want to have this subscription. So with that background in mind, let's take a look at who was the threat actor that actually initiated this method and how it evolved in a short span of time. So the Toll method was pioneered by a threat actor known as Conti, aka Visit Spider. Conti is a threat actor that is now defunct, but at sometime before 2022 was very, very prolific. And since its shutdown has actually split into smaller groups and has rebranded a lot. So I'm not going into the details of rebrand, that could be a talk for some other time. But Conti was instrumental in initiating callback phishing method, and some of the campaigns were observed as early as February of 2021. So what Conti did was the threat actor launched subscription-themed code campaigns to distribute a malware known as Bazar Loader, which is a backdoor. And these campaigns came to be famously known as BazarCall campaigns because of the fact that the malware of choice was Bazar Loader, and the victim had to call the threat actor. I've also posted a link here that is a video on YouTube that gives a very good interaction. It's a real interaction between the victim and the operator from the call center, and gives you a very good idea on how the operator is using different social engineering techniques to lure the victim into downloading a malicious document. So it's a 30-minute video. I encourage you all to go to that and take a look. And like I said earlier, BazarCall campaign typically uses free email services and likely compromised email addresses. It's a multi-stage attack. That is a very, very important point to note. Post-compromise activity includes dropping of follow-up payloads, and the eventual goal is to exfiltrate data for extortion and deploying Conti ransomware. Now here's a take on the BazarCall attack chain that I'm mapping to MITRE attack framework here. So initial access in this case is achieved through the told email. Once the victim receives the email for a subscription and falls for the lure, the victim calls the operator, talks to a real person from the fraudulent call center, and is directed by the operator to go to a malicious website that is impersonating the brand itself. Once the user goes to that site, he's directed to an account page where he can actually put in his confirmation number that was received in that email that he received, and which leads to the downloading of a macro-enabled Excel. The fraudulent operator then lures the victim into enabling the macro to see the cancellation number. And once that happens, that is when BazarLoader is executed on victim's system, and it leads to initial reconnaissance which is then sent to the command and control. This is followed by deployment of Cobalt Strike, which allows the attacker to have hands-on keyboard access to the system itself. Once all that is achieved, the next step is the discovery phase, where the attacker enumerates the networks using built-in Windows utilities. We heard about that in previous talks as well, how threat actors are using legitimate tools to for their malicious activities. So they use a lot of inbuilt utilities to enumerate the network. And there's a tool known as AD-Find, which is actually used to enumerate the domain and groups. Once the attacker has an understanding of the target systems to which the attacker wants to move, the attacker then uses Cobalt Strike custom PSExec functionality to move laterally. And one of the key themes here that you'll see in all these ransomware actors is that they like to first stage the data before they exfiltrate that. So staging is done using some of these tools like 7zip, and then Outclone is used for actually exfiltration of the data. Once exfiltration is done, the next step is use of PSExec to deploy Conti ransomware on different systems. So this is all about the BazarCall attack chain. And now I'm just going to pivot to how it has evolved and what it looks like now. So like I said earlier, the toad method was introduced by Conti in Feb 2021. Conti itself consisted of smaller groups that had specific purposes. As an example, Team 1 was a subgroup that has been attributed for the development of the Riot ransomware itself. Team 2 contained specific specialized members that were specialized in hacking. So what happened was in January of 2022, some members from Conti Team 1 created a splinter group known as Xeon. And then in March of 2022, Team 2 members created a group known as SRG, or Silent Ransomware Group. You may know of this group also as Lunamont. In April of 2022, Conti Team 2 merged with another group, Quantum Locker, and took over their operations, but kept the name as Quantum. So these are the three main threat actors that are actually using toad methods as of now. And after that, we know that Conti shut down sometime in May of 2022. But I do want to highlight the evolution of the BazarCall campaign after that. What happened was, prior to June of 2022, the threat actor known as Quantum used BazarCall for their campaigns, for their toad campaigns. But since June of 2022, they kind of created their own version, which came to be known as Charmander, which essentially relies on the use of iced ID instead of BazarCall. In September of 2022, Xeon itself rebranded to what we know now as Royal Ransomware. With this in mind, let's just take a look at the individual threat actors that I just mentioned, starting with Royal Ransomware. Like I said earlier, this is a splinter group from Conti, first appeared in Jan 2022, as Xeon rebranded itself to Royal in September of 2022. This is a very prolific ransomware group, and as of now is among the top 5 in the ransomware space. Some of the key highlights for this group does not follow the ransomware as a service model. It operates as a private group, does not offer any affiliate programs. It employs double extortion as a tactic, which means that the group exfiltrates data prior to deployment of ransomware. The ransom demand have ranged from $250 million up to $11 million in Bitcoin. And I've also listed some of the sectors Royal Ransomware has targeted of late. You can see a whole breadth of sectors here. And the group overwhelmingly seems to target entities in the United States, followed by Germany, Canada, Venezuela, and Brazil. So when this group Another important point that I wanted to mention here is that when this group came into existence, the initial campaigns relied on Black Cat ransomware, but they soon pivoted to their very own ransomware strain known as Xeon. But since September of 2022, they have since switched to the Royal ransomware strain, which is their current strain of choice. Now let's take a look at the Royal attack chain and understand how it is different from what we saw previously with regards to Conti. Again, initial access is achieved in this case through a toad email. What is different here is when the victim calls the operator is actually luring the victim to install a remote access tool. Some of the tools that have been observed in Royal campaigns are listed here. Some of them were also mentioned in the previous talks as well. Splashtop, Altera Agent, AnyDesk. Once initial access is achieved, the next step is to deploy follow-on malware like Qbot and Cobalt Strike. A key highlight here is for defensive evasion, the Royal ransomware relies on certain tools such as PC Hunter, Process Hacker to disable your antivirus solutions, and also uses tools like Gmer for disabling your EDR solutions. Once that is done, reconnaissance is again done through your built-in Windows utilities. The network is enumerated. Again, they also use a tool, AdFind, for enumerating your domains. And once all that is achieved and they have a list of the target systems, they use RDP to move laterally and use tools like Mega and again rclone for exfiltration of data. Now, in certain campaigns, there's a specific tool known as Chisel, which is a tunneling tool that has been observed in certain intrusions that has been used for command and control. I just wanted to highlight that here as well. And finally, once data is exfiltrated, again, the group uses PSExec to deploy Royal ransomware. Now let's move on to the next group that I mentioned earlier, which is Quantum ransomware group. Some highlights again, like I said earlier, this is a merger between Quantum Locker and several members of the Conti's Team 2. Conti Team 2 took over the operations in April, kept the name Quantum. This group follows the ransomware as a service model, employs double extortion as a tactic, but where it is different from Royal is that their toad campaigns evolved over a period of time and came to be known as Jawmonger, like I mentioned earlier, and they started using iced ID instead of BazarCall. They are known to hire people specializing in OSINT, spamming, call center operations, and also known for incredibly fast campaigns. They are really fast. In certain intrusions, Quantum ransomware has been deployed often within hours after initial compromise. They have been observed to target many sectors as well, which I have listed here. And let's take a look at the Quantum attack chain as well, how it is different from Royal. In this case, what happens is the victim again calls the call center regarding a subscription. Quantum is known to impersonate large brands. They have impersonated large brands in the past, and they continue to do so. In this case, the operator directs the victim to download a malicious document, which when enabled leads to the deployment of iced ID, which is what the differentiation is in case of Quantum as opposed to Conti. This is followed up by Cobalt Strike, again to gain keyboard access, followed by reconnaissance using the same Windows utility tools and AdFind, again for enumerating the domain. Quantum also uses RDP to move laterally within the network to the target systems, high-value targets, and uses rclone again to exfiltrate data. What is different in terms of deployment of ransomware is that not only does it use PSExec, but the threat actor has been observed to also use WMI for deploying quantum ransomware. With that, let's move on to the last threat actor that I wanted to talk about here, which is Silent Ransomware Group, also known as SRG. This is a group that is different than the two that I talked about earlier. It's again a splinter group from Conti, also known as Lunamod. But what is different about this group is that this is purely an extortion group. It does not deploy ransomware. Its whole objective is to gain access to the victim system, look for sensitive documents and information, exfiltrate that, and demand payment for that. They have not been observed to do lateral movement as well. They just focus on just gaining access and collecting data from those systems itself. They, though, have been observed to enumerate the network, do some reconnaissance. What is again different in case of Silent Ransomware Group is that they do not use any malware. Instead, they rely on legitimate and trusted system management tools to interact directly with the victim system, which is different than what you saw in the previous cases. They are known to target the following sectors: legal, retail, financial services. And again, I wanted to walk you guys through their attack chain, which is a bit different than what we saw with Quantum and Royal. Once the victim, again falling to that lure, calls the call center, the operator lures the victim into initiating a remote session using Zoho Assist. Once that is done, the operator then installs certain remote management tools. Some of that I have listed here: Splashtop, Altera Agent, and also Synchro has been observed in certain intrusions. Once that is done, that is actually done to gain persistence on the system. The attacker then does recon using tools like SoftPerfect Network Scanner, Shop Shares, and collects the data and exfiltrates that using Arun or SCP. Notice there's no lateral movement here. It's all about collecting the data from the system and exfiltrating that. And there's no deployment of any ransomware. And we have seen a rise in some threat actors that are actually now relying just on extortion. They don't feel the need to go beyond and deploy ransomware itself. So this leads to the next question, which is, what can we do about this method? What are the key some of the key takeaways that I have listed here are, there are really 3 lines of defense that we can use. The first line of defense, of course, is your awareness training, employee cybersecurity awareness training. And what needs to be done is to highlight these stored campaigns, the subscription lures, and how the attacker is luring the victim into calling the fraudulent call center. That is something that is missing sometimes in those trainings. This is your first line of defense. Second line of defense, of course, is your defense in depth. You need to have a full-blown security stack all the way from your network to the endpoint, along with detection capabilities that look for behavioral anomalies in the environment. We talked about some of the utilities that they use. They are legitimate utilities, but these threat actors are using that for malicious activities as well. So what is important is to detect those anomalies in the environment. The third line of defense is what I like to call threat detection, that is designed to detect threats and multi-stage attacks rather than silo use cases like network scanning or lateral movement. What is required is an end-to-end use case that looks for activity post-compromise all the way to exfiltration. And you can add on top of it programs like threat hunting and purple teaming, red teaming exercises to look for any activities associated with those anomalies as well. So those were the key takeaways that I wanted to provide here. To summarize this talk, we started with Toad, which is a type of phishing that is used to deploy ransomware and is also used for extortion. Then we talked about threat actor known as Conti that pioneered this technique, and the campaigns that they used, came to be known as BazarCall because they used BazarCall as the malware of choice. Then we talked about some of those subgroups, Team 1, 2, and 3, and how Team 1 went on to create Xeon, which was itself rebranded into Royal Ransomware Group. This is again a private group. It doesn't follow the ransomware as a service model. Team 2 went on to create, merged with Quantum Locker to create a group known as Quantum. Their campaigns came to be known as Jaw Mounder because they used Iced ID instead of Bazar Loader. Some members from Team 2 also created the threat actor known as Silent Ransomware Group. This is purely an extortion group. Then we talked about some of the prevention and mitigation techniques that need to be applied. And we talked about the 3 lines of defense: employee awareness trainings, defense in depth, and finally, threat detection based on your threats instead of silo use cases. Next, I also wanted to highlight some of the sources that I used here, and I would encourage you all to go to these links and go through those documents. They are all very good reads. And finally, would like to thank you all. And if you guys want to connect with me, happy to connect on LinkedIn. And I've also added my email address here. With that, let me hand it back to Ryan.